So, before we, as you can tell, I like to talk. So, what is it? So let me give you a chance to talk. Do you have any questions? I've actually covered about a third of the material that I have tonight. So we got a lot more to talk about. There's a lot more to fill in. But before we go there, is there any particular issue that concerns you, that you're confused about, that I could at least note down to cover as I move forward? Any reflections? Just any reflections on the first part of this evening?
I don't think that human race is in control of the nature. I think that the nature controls the human race. Maybe because of the... I don't think that the relationship between nature and human human control the nature.
It's not.
No, I don't.
See that? You know this word?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the relationship. Peach? It is, we are not in charge, the trees are not in charge, we are all equal participants in creating the condition for life on this planet. Do you understand? So, I know that came across that way, I did not mean it. Good point. Yes?
I have a very basic question. I think that you just gave us hope by showing us examples with the North American Indians, maybe some Aboriginal tribes in Australia that lead this way. My main concern is, can we reach this scale of reciprocal interaction by living in large cities, or is one of the big challenges to move into smaller scale communities to be able to reach this level?
Did everybody hear that question?
No.
Okay, can you talk louder? You can do it in Spanish because I don't know what you're talking about.
Mi pregunta era que, bueno, primero le comentaba que nos dio un poco de esperanza, ¿no? Al poner los ejemplos de los indios norteamericanos y de algunas otras comunidades como los aborígenes en Australia que saben vivir en armonía con la naturaleza, pero la pregunta es si realmente existe una manera de llegar a este nivel de armonía e integración viviendo en grandes ciudades como lo hacemos ahora, o si la única alternativa realmente es abandonar estas grandes ciudades y reubicarnos en pequeñas comunidades de menor escala donde realmente podamos llegar a tener este nivel de interacción con la naturaleza.
Good. Now, this mic I can't use. Better? See, can you hear the buzzing? Can you put it a little lower? I'll put it down. So, okay, big cities. It seems that everybody says we've got to be moving into big cities, right, to make the world sustainable. The flip side is that it's kind of an arcology, or where Paul Soleri's work, where he basically puts all humans in this mega. Could we actually do something about this feedback? Because I'm not going to use this. So the idea of megacities is useful for the population that we have right now, the burgeoning population, but it may save energy. People say New York City is the most sustainable city on the planet because it uses less energy. By the way, let me just do a little sidebar on this. Carbon neutrality does not mean sustainability. You hear this all the time. We need to be a carbon neutral planet. We're going to go, carbon neutrality is used as a synonym for sustainability. What happens when we achieve carbon neutrality? There's no more climate change, hopefully, eventually.
But we're still doing so many other things like pesticides in agricultural areas, the salinization of soil.
Exactly.
So many things, yeah.
So,
we're still not independent.
we're not in relationship. We're certainly not in a reciprocal relationship. We're just doing less damage. So it's very important to do it, but don't be fooled by it. In fact, what's interesting though, the more that we go into this reciprocal relationship, the more that we are going to be motivated to be carbon neutral. Now, this is a long drawn out answer, but it's important. Let me just tell a story about the squirrels in my backyard. When the acorns stop producing trees, the squirrels somehow figure out in advance that there's not going to be as much food the next year, and they don't have as many babies. We don't have that capability in the human population anymore. We are not sensitive to the carrying capacity, and I will use the word there. I want to make sure, so now I'm going to do another diversion. Carrying capacity is a useful term when we have manifested the full potential of an ecosystem. If we can even tell that. But there is a limit to growth, right? But we've desertified, what, a third of the world? I don't know. More. And we can bring a lot of that back. So the carrying capacity of the planet can increase, but until we actually have the ability to understand, I don't have a right to fly blueberries from Chile to Boston so that I can have my crappy blueberry fix in the winter.
Even if they're organic.
Even if they're organic.
Doesn't matter.
So the point is that at some point we are going to run out of food. We are already running out of food. So we've already exceeded the carrying capacity of the planet. So whether we move into big cities or not is the question. It doesn't matter. What I would say now is that it's actually more important for us to have knowledgeable people living all around the world as co-creators. Because until humans are interacting with the ecosystem, they will remain damaged. The damage that we cause, we actually have to uncause. Now that's a broad brush statement, but and that doesn't mean we all go out and we build Walmart. We have to live much differently. And we have to live in relationship like the squirrels in my backyard. So there's no right answer. Big cities are important, and living amongst the life is important. But until we learn to live amongst life, we're probably better off in the big cities. But I think the more that we understand that our role is to be a co-creator, like a gardener, then we're going to go out and garden. So, I don't know if that helps. Any other thoughts? Yes. What's your name?
Julieta. What do you think about density? Because it's a subject that's mentioned a lot, that density is sustainable. But I'm not sure if it works everywhere. Because if you densify a city like Mexico City, the infrastructure is not enough. And it's old, and the roads are not enough to carry over traffic. And what's your point of view about densifying?
I think I've actually given my point of view already. What do you think it is?
I mean, you said that it's not important if it's in the cities or if it's
Okay, let me ask this another way.
relationship.
What does density have to do with sustainability?
People say that it's better because we don't spread out.
Yeah, and so when we spread out, what are people afraid of if we spread out?
To finish with all the resources.
Environmental damage,
Environmental damage.
gasoline consumption, energy consumption.
Right, right. So what does then we have to define what spreading out means. If it's spreading out into suburbs, is that good or bad?
I think it's bad if you live in a suburb but you want to go work in a city and you want to go buy your food in a city. If you're self-sustainable outside of the city, then it really, I don't understand why they would worry about gasoline or they would worry about damaging the environment. If we learn to be independent, then we don't need to go to the city.
Okay, that's kind of my answer. Does that make sense? So the answer is it depends, and what it depends on is our ability to be in relationship with the life in that unique place. And the problem is that we make these blanket statements. Density is important, or density is bad, or suburbia is good, or those are stupid statements because they're abstract. They need to be based on the place. What is the nature of the place, and what will it allow, and what can we thrive and help that place thrive in a reciprocal relationship with? That's the question. So when we make these broad principles that have no bearing on understanding of life, I'm just going to say it, they're bullshit. Bullshit statements. But you hear them all the time because we all want an automatic answer. We all want the answer, right? Just give me the answer and I don't have to think. Sorry, folks, you have to think. You have to not plotting, you have to think.
First thing, everyone.
Sure.
Just a reflection that you have put on the table. Human beings have developed a system of thinking that has caused the state of the world nowadays. Human beings, for that matter, can create a new system of thinking. But it's not a system of thinking that deals with a structure or with a method probably, but it's something that happens with the natural integration of thinking with nature, because we are nature. And of course the solution is a holistic one, and it does not deal only with the space, but also with every issue in the planet. What you are sharing with us tonight also includes, for instance, peace. There is no way we can make peace. Peace is not something that has to be made. Peace exists, and we can choose. So I believe that in order to create and to lead more than to create a new way of thinking, the solution is new paths for education.
And I would amend that slightly, if I may. It's new path for development. Because education, I think that's what you're implying with education, but if all we're doing is dumping information at people, which is a lot of what our education system is about, it's not going to help. We actually have to be developing the capability and capacity of people to understand how to think. Because we don't think anymore. In fact, there was an article in the New Yorker a few years ago saying there is no, it's really irritating, that there is no why anymore. Have you ever run across that? I've run across that with some of my instructors, like, when I ask why, they would get very angry. Well, because I said so, or because this is the way it is. Don't challenge me to think about why. And that story came from a fellow who was on a Nazi concentration. He was with his grandfather on a Nazi concentration camp train. They were going to a concentration camp, and his grandfather reached out at a bridge abutment to grab an icicle. The train had been stopped. He reached out through the slats in the boxcar to grab an icicle to drink. And the soldier who was guarding the bridge knocked his hand away, knocked the icicle out of the hand. The grandfather said, "So why did you do that?" And the soldier said, "There is no why anymore." So we have that problem in our culture right now, in European culture, is that we are becoming fascist, especially, I can tell you the United States is becoming fascist, because there's this kind of dominating desire to control knowledge instead of explore knowledge. And so the process of education is about giving people information in our culture, at least in the United States. As you can tell, I'm not very happy about the United States. And the nature of true education is a developmental process where we are all learning, because none of us know everything. And until we put ourselves in that position of humility, we're all figuring this out together. And I'm figuring this out with you. The comments that you're giving to me help me refine this message just as importantly as I'm helping you, I think, help. Sorry, that was a sidebar of this. So thank you, Carlos. Any other reflections?
For Carlos'
intervention,
Yeah.
I was thinking about the thought of the think of what's your name? About density. That's in your name?
Julieta.
Julieta. Well, about About density, the problem in, I think, in Mexico's policy of housing of the last 10 years been about densify some place, but not in a system, in a complete holistic development. So they didn't include mobility, they didn't include industry, they didn't include. They were just thinking, oh, let's go to build houses.
Okay, so where did the idea of density come from?
Well, in Mexico City?
No, everywhere. It's everywhere. Everywhere.
What about put more people together so they probably can share more infrastructure, they can share more services, so you don't need to spread a lot of services.
Makes some sense,
But
right?
if you don't connect that to another, with mobility, with work, place for work, and healthcare and everything.
Okay, so let me give you
you.
another issue that density doesn't address. Density does not address relationship. Density does not address relationship with the way life works. It addresses the way life is expected to work or has worked by humans in the last 150 years. That's all. It's basically old knowledge that is being applied without any kind of understanding of the larger context. Sometimes density is going to be important, and sometimes it isn't.
Well, Christopher, I mean, it's like that because I lived in different countries, and I noticed with the United States model development, which is highly suburbanized, and it's like you were saying, like pods. Everything is, there's no interconnectivity. When they design in the suburbs, you have a shop with a parking lot. It doesn't even connect to the surrounding areas because there's fear that you might go to another business. And with a lot of what's happening here in Mexico with like Infonavit housing, with the program that we have for purchasing houses, it's density, but it's still a suburban format, like you're saying. There's no connectivity. Or even some of the buildings that they build at higher density, they're inwardly focused, but they don't really think about how they connect to the outside world and symbiotically relate. There's no connectivity.
Good. So let me, this is good. What do humans need to survive on this planet?
Connectivity, relationships.
Relationships.
Yeah, that's one of the big
Relationships with what?
With each other for one, but with the environment.
Yeah.
With
Let's just stop. Okay, all this stuff, and that's where I want to go right now, because I want to show you how. Because I believe that this discussion is what we typically have, and we get different opinions on different sides of the fence. I agree with every opinion, by the way. And I'm not being politically correct. I do. But what is the qualifier for that? The answer is, it depends. It is never an absolute. I go into communities, we're working with some communities, and there's literally 135 ideas, I counted one time, on what we were going to do with this land. And people were violently opposed to the other ones, right? They all had their idea. How do you reconcile that? And that is what this is about. So let me, I'm actually jumping way ahead. I'm going to do it because I think it's in context. So let me draw a diagram. Can you all see this flip chart over there? I'm actually moving ahead on a slide. What we do with opinions all right, every design, you see? Huh? What are you pointing out? Okay. I thought you were giving me some editorial comment. So, all design, anything you do in life can be seen as this very simple diagram. There are activating forces, and there are restraining forces. You want to do a building? That's your activating force. What are the restraints? Budget. People complaining about you moving in next door. Constructability, climate. Somehow we do one of two things. Now I know in Spanish this is a problem word. But one of two things. We either reconcile or harmonize, which means basically there's a win-win relationship. That doesn't happen very often. Now, you need to help me here with the Spanish. We use the word compromise down here. That isn't really a good word in Spanish. Huh?
Concesión.
Ceder.
So let me tell you what do you think the word, what word should I, we use the word compromise, but I know it doesn't have the same impact.
Como pone en riesgo, compromete la viabilidad.
So it's translated.
I think ceder is compromise one thing for the other.
All right, let me give you what compromise.
Compromise is bringing risk.
Here, let me explain what goes on with compromise. You all know this, so you can come up with the right words. This happens. So, I want to have a new Air Force base in my state. I'm a congressman in the United States. There's somebody else that doesn't want that Air Force base, but they want social justice. And they say, all right, you give me money for my social justice program, and I'll allow you to have half the base. And the guy says, well, that's better than nothing. So I'll have half the Air Force base, and you'll get a little money for your social justice program. And both of our egos have been destroyed. And now we're both happy because we won, right? Because we're all lawyers, right? You know, win. So what happened is lose, lose. Now we do the same thing with green buildings. We talk about green buildings. Say, I want energy efficiency. It's going to cost more money. Well, it's good for the environment. Well, you can't have too much energy efficiency because that will be too expensive. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of energy efficiency. I'll give you half the money you wanted, and you can have a little bit of energy efficiency. That's compromise, right? Now what happens, but that's what people hold up to be the highest of human achievement, is compromise. You're a big person, you've been able to compromise. Now is that fair? Is that what happens? Does that happen in Mexico too? What's the word you would use?
It's imposing.
What?
It's imposing, not compromising.
Imploding?
Imposing or
Imposing. Yeah, that's what word. Consensus. Oh, good word. Yes. Thank you. Consensus is another way of compromise. All right, we're going to lower it. As long as we all agree, then we can go home happy. We basically destroy the earth. Now, see, here's what happens. No, because it does. That's what you think about this. Consensus means we drop it a little, and the next time you go along, we drop it a little more, and the next time you go along, we drop it a little. Where does this go? It doesn't stop until we destroy the earth. Seriously. So we need to actually get the concept of consensus out of our minds, and I'm serious about that. It is a debilitating concept. The only thing we can do is reconcile. So let me give you an example from green buildings. Would you like me to do that? Yeah. Is that how you reconcile? In fact, it's going to be too hard to find. Let me have a straw down. You all see this one? All right, so this is a class. I use this all the time, so sorry for people who have seen this. This is money, this is stuff. Okay, so I want to do a green building. And I'm going to use the example of a house builder in Boulder, Colorado about 15 years ago. And he wanted to build a green house. And at the time, it was a $165,000 house. That's the market at the time. And he wanted to make it green, and the first thing that he wanted to do was make it energy efficient, because he could at least get payback on energy efficiency. People would value the energy efficiency. So he said, but he also knew that green buildings cost too much. We hired some colleagues of mine. They had a workshop, and the first thing they did is they looked at what's the weakest link in a green building in terms of energy efficiency. Where's the most energy wasted? Yeah, you're right. No, Mexico is a tough place to have an energy discussion because you guys have this perfect climate. I mean,
but still, I'm living out in a very large project called Relation Fund.
yeah.
And as a user, I'm really angry because in my part, really, the sun is coming all day, so I'm burning every day. And my neighbors are cold all day.
And they're heat.
Yeah, so it's horrible because they already say that relation came with a fund, a real estate fund, green fund, for developing real estate projects for energy efficient.
Yeah.
But it's not. I mean, I have a really good coolers, and my neighbor has a really good one for warm.
Yeah.
So all the building is for cold.
Happens all over the world. Bad design. So, well, it is. So, but so the windows are the weakest link in buildings in the cold areas of the United States. So the first thing that anybody who's doing energy efficiency is going to look at increasing the effectiveness of the windows. So instead of double glazed windows, which we need there, they decided to price double glazed low emissivity windows, and that added $700 to the price of the house. Now $700 is a lot of money when you're selling a house for only $165,000. It's actually a fair amount of your profit. So the developer said, I knew green buildings were too expensive, we're not doing it. So the team said, no, you can't be toe dip. You have to dive in. You can't do that one, it's cold. You got to take the plunge. And the plunge means that you actually have to, because it's a systems game, and we have to question every assumption we make. And the one assumption that we can question is the effectiveness of the windows. Let's try to go for the best possible windows we could imagine and see what happens, and then analyze it. So we went with triple glazed argon-filled windows. That added $2,000 to the price of the house. Now, the developer's reaction was heart attack. But we said, stop. We have to take the time to play the systems game. And by the way, this is the one-word answer that I will give you for effective design. And that includes this word, but it also includes making buildings energy efficient and LEED, platinum, etc., is to have a discovery process. Have a much longer time in advance to analyze the issues of the building before you start to design. So I tell architects, put your pen on the table and back slowly away. Don't pick up the damn pen or your computer screen until you know the facts. The facts about energy, because if they knew the facts in your building, they could have designed it in such a way that you wouldn't have had that problem.
The next thing is the designer is the same designer of the Petronas.
That doesn't matter.
No, I mean that, and the second one is they want the LEED certification.
Yeah.
So I'm a section user is not. First, put some technical goods.
We don't need. So there's lots of things they could have done, and there's lots of things they should have done, but we don't do it because we actually do the checkbox.
Well,
we don't need it. That's a lot. I can spend 2 hours on that. So we don't need it. So that's why I'm not trying to stop you, but I can stop you. So triple glazed argon-filled windows, but now we have to play the systems game. If we're going to spend that much money for windows, they better be worth something. So what issues are connected to a window? And if we had a half an hour, we could actually have kind of an interesting discussion. But let me tell you, heat loss, heat gain, views, blinds, curtains, ultraviolet degradation on the carpet and the furniture. I mean, you've got all those things going on. The one thing that's connected, so can we do anything about that? The question is, what are the implications? Well, here's one big thing that's connected to every window. A radiator or an air register blowing warm air across the window. And the reason those are there in every cold climate in the United States is because the windows are cold and you feel cold next to them, so you bathe them with warm air. And it keeps the condensation off the window. Makes sense, right? Except, it doesn't make sense when you're spending $2,000 for the best windows on the planet. Those windows are have better insulating quality than walls did in the 1970s. That's true. So the question is, how come we need the air register? You know what? We don't. So all the ductwork that supplied the first floor windows and the second floor windows was able to be removed, and the air was able to be supplied in a central shaft with a return air, return to the central shaft. And interestingly enough, I didn't get to the punchline here. So here's $2,000 for the windows. We had another $1,500 for insulation. So over $3,500 that we spent on that. Guess what it cost to, guess what we saved by getting rid of those ducts? $3,500. So, those really expensive windows are free, and the insulation's free. But it gets better than that. We don't need a boiler anymore. Before 100,000 British thermal units boiler per square foot. $4,000 saved. Wow. But we do need heat. What else provides a heat? Because we're just playing the systems game. What else provides heat in the house?
It's a
Fireplace, well, not really. It's easier.
The sun.
Sun, but the sun doesn't always shine. Humans, but you know, one friend said, I can heat my house with a candle and a 2-year-old.
People.
But not enough. Water. Hot water. Hot water heater, that's the most steady source of heat. So that actually, there was enough heat out of the hot water heater to heat the house, but we needed better controls. That cost another $1,000. And then the house was so tight that there was an air-to-air heat exchanger required. But that had a blower motor, and there was another blower motor for the furnace unit. Well, why do we need 2 blower motors? So we combined that, had a manufacturer design that. That added another $1,000. And that's where the project ended at $2,000 less cost than conventional construction, but with 60% energy savings. Okay, you see how this works? That if you get to the root of the issue, you can reconcile. But what we don't do in our design process, whether it's with buildings or with the land that we're working on, is we think that consensus is the ultimate in human achievement, which means lose-lose. So, get this out of your minds. It's time to go here. Now, any questions on that? Make sense? And by the way, you can do this on skyscrapers. It works any place in the world, this thinking. And it gets better than that. I mean, we've designed buildings that have, just by shifting the reflectives of the paint color 10% more. This is probably a 70% reflective white. We went to an 80% reflective white. We could get rid of 25% of these light fixtures. And we would save air conditioning costs, the air conditioning costs. I mean, all these things are connected. And if we don't take the time to think about them, then the green buildings do cost more. Okay. All right. We're going to get back to the heavy stuff. Ready? Okay, we've got this. We're done at 9:30, right? And what time is it now? Okay. Gonna be fast. Furious.
Can I ask you one question?
Maybe.
Frame the idea or the concept of thought and think.
This? Okay. Thoughting is, I mean, from my perspective, what do you think it is? What do you think thoughting is?
Pre-established ideas,
Yeah.
misconceptions that we learn.
And a process. Right? I mean, you're the one that gave me Bishop Capper's lecture last night. So he captured life in these 3 terms, is that right? So life has 3: structure, relationship, and process. What our culture is really good at is structure, for the most part. Stuff. It's the relationship between the stuff that makes life, and that's invisible. And that's why we have a hard time with thinking. Because the thinking is required here. This is the relationship part. You understand what I mean? That it's invisible? We can't see the relationships. But the fact that I have a friend with you, Raoul, and vice versa, is that has nothing to do with the structure either of us has. It has to do with our proximity of relationship and the process. The ability to process a conversation. And so the process of thinking, this is typical thought, right? To do this requires us to really wrap our head around it. It takes time. And what we don't do in the design process, and this is a whole other lecture, an 8-hour lecture literally, is that you buy a book. But
is the integrated design process, where you actually spend a lot more time up front discovering and answering questions before you do the design.
And I will guarantee you, you will save money, you will make more money, and your client will be happier. We're working on a new wastewater treatment plant in Vancouver, British Columbia right now. We spent 6 months on this process of reconciling their belief structure and the principles that they were going to act from. They did not design a thing for 6 months. We restrained it. We said, you are not. We said, put your pencils down. You're not going to design. You hired us to do this work. You can be mad at us, but we're going to prevent you from doing this. And they were upset. By December of this year, they were giddy. They were so amazed because by slowing down the process and getting all the research done and the potential of the project, it's no longer a wastewater treatment plant, it's a network of ecosystem health. So they stopped designing a thing and they went in to understand their relationships. But they didn't get that. We have to say, no, expand the problem. Your problem is not here, it's out here. And that was automatic thinking. And by actually our role as a designer, because what we were designing is the design process for this project, our role as a designer was to restrain people so they can activate new ideas and reconcile. But I don't know, Michael. Anyway, it's the future, folks. If we want to actually achieve this kind of stuff and cost saving and better performance, we actually have to slow down the design process to understand what we're actually designing and why. Also, I should tell you that in doing that, we've had 3 projects where they didn't build the building as a result. Want to hear one of those stories? Yes. Yeah. So,
just like if you have a client and you are going to say to him, I'm going to think what I'm going to offer you for 6 months, she will say like, okay, but I'm paying those 6 months. So why did you?
Yeah, we were fired. And we were hired back the day later because the entire design team went on strike. Because they were getting it's interesting dynamics. Thinking is really hard. Thoughting isn't. And we were making the entire organization think a process that they thought that they were experts in. And we said, as one guy said, and Loretto, one guy said, he said, Bill, you got to actually, this is actually understanding you're managing your own state, not getting angry. One guy said, Bill, we didn't hire you to do this. And I said, in one of these moments, to the guy's name was David, I said, David, you hired me and you can fire me. And you can fire me, but you can't fire me till 5 o'clock this afternoon. Now sit down. And please let me do what I think you got me here to do. 45 minutes later, he was excited as anything. Because it takes time to engage in thinking. So Office Depot is an example. And I went through so much to talk about. Okay, Office Depot. So they hired us to do this natural system stuff. Office Depot, you know, the office supply store, headquartered in Boca Raton, Florida. Flew it out for an hour, 1 hour meeting with the executive vice president. Explained to him the way we work, and he said, I thought you'd talk about that, it's too late. I said, well, it's never too late. He said, well, it's too late on this project. And I said, not wanting to get into a yes, no argument. I just sat back and I said, okay, it's too late. Kind of passive aggressive. And so, what was I going to say to the guy? He told me it was too late. So I said, and he was a good guy. He said, well, what else are you going to do for me? You have 45 more minutes. And I said, well, okay. It's kind of a funny situation to me. And I said, we are systems thinkers, so do you mind if I play a systems game with you? He said, cool, let's do it. He said, I'm going to play with you what Charles Deming did with the Japanese automotive industry in the 1950s. The American automotive industry didn't want to pay attention to what Charles Deming said. He went over to Japan and created Honda, Toyota, Nissan, juggernauts of companies at the time. And he basically had one premise that was really important. And he said, any situation you do must be tested to a level of 5 whys. I'm going to get to this in a minute. I'll give you one. 5 whys. Why are you doing that? Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to do that? So I said, if Charles Deming can do it, Toyota can do it, you think we can do this with Bacchus Steel? He said, sure, let's play. All right. So why are you building this hospital? He said, we want to house our growing workforce. Great. Why do you want to house your growing workforce? We want to have better communication and esprit de corps. Our business will be more efficient. Okay? And there was a concept drawing by HOK, the architecture firm, on the wall. And I said, so I didn't know where I was going with this. I said, so why, if you build this building, will you have better esprit de corps? And he sat for about a minute in total silence. And you know how long that is when you're with a stranger? A lot of time. I was really nervous. And he went, holy expletive, you just saved me $30 million. He said, I'll take 10%. I did. And he ignored that. And I said, all right, what happened? And he said, I never thought about this, but 1,200 of our staff are on headphones all the time. They don't talk to each other. You know, it's mail, you know, it's a big internet service company, an IT service company primarily, not retail stores. He said, they don't talk, they don't need to be we can say, we don't have to build 25% of this building. You're hired. Great. So a week later, I was fired. No, not really, but he said, I'm sorry, he approached his design team and the entire facilities team. He said, well, I had this great experience. You don't have to build 25% of this building. What do you think? They told him, get out of here.
How can you get away with saying that?
This train has already left the station. And he said, you know, I blew it. And he realized what he'd done because we needed to lift all those people up together. There had to be a co-discovery process. One guy just can't come in and pronounce. And that's why, by the way, with community people, when you're working with, the process that I'm going to go through right now is a co-discovery process. You can't come in and say, I know the answer. The best way that you can come in to a design process is with no mind. Get rid of your ego. You know, it's hard to do for all of us. Your job is to help all the stakeholders. You might be one of them, the design team, the client team, the users of the building, the ecosystem, all those are stakeholders. All right, I'm going to roll now. So, let's see. I'm going to skip this. Brattleboro Food Co-op is an example, because this is one example that actually works with architects, because it's actually about a building. So we were approached to do a green grocery store, LEED Gold grocery store in Brattleboro, Vermont. And one of the questions that I ask all my clients is, do you want LEED or do you want sustainability? There's a difference. And these people said, no, we get the difference. We want to go as far as we can possibly go. Cool. All right. So we did a little bit of research on the ecosystem. We had a first meeting with the executive committee, and the research really summarizes that the average forkful bite of food in the United States travels 3,500 miles. So I said, let's do a test of this, because I wanted a sustainable grocery store. A bite of food traveling 3,500 miles is hardly sustainable. So we did a tour to the grocery store, and sure enough, we turned over apples from New Zealand, strawberries from California, and blueberries from Chile. It's the winter. And there we were. I said, so what happens if there's a truckers' strike? Do you have a sustainable grocery store? And they said, and we've been worried of what happens if Whole Foods comes into town. Because they can beat us. You know, they're a big national chain. So we're out of business too. What's the one thing that Whole Foods can't compete with or a truckers' strike can't compete with? Local food. So that's why you see this drawing on the board. There's nothing to do with the building here. We said this is not a building project. This is a food. This is a nature and nutrition project. And so, I'll tell you a long story short. This grocery store was programmed to become an agricultural and soil extension service. Oh, by the way, the best soil. So we did a study. All these farm These farms were all abandoned. There's maybe 1 or 2 active farms in a 30-mile radius of Brattleboro. Whereas 20 years ago, there were hundreds of farms. The best soil was in downtown Brattleboro. People say, oh, it's built there. Really? This is our either-or culture. Quantity, quality, science, religion, heart, mind, you know, we get that thing. So, oh, we built there. Well, no, you haven't. You've only built over 35% of the land. Where did most towns feed themselves in World War II? Backyards. They're incredibly productive. And so, this grocery store was programmed to become an agricultural and soil extension service that teach people how to grow their own food again with test soil. And a cannery, so they could can their own food. And a forest service extension, so they could begin to restore and work with people on restoring the watershed, with help with the soil. And a daycare center to take care of the kids. And an abattoir for hunters to dress their meat, because they do hunt a lot there. And what else? Oh, a credit union to loan money to farmers. So, anyway, we made this presentation to the board. The executive committee got it, because they had been working with us, but the board had no clue, because we weren't paid enough money to get everybody involved. And somebody raised his hand and said, what is this stuff? All we wanted was a grocery store. And we really blew it. Because we didn't work on raising, just like Office Depot, you know, we didn't raise everybody up together. We've learned a lot since then. And, well, we were fired. We get fired a lot. But let me tell you something. I'm actually very proud of that. And I am, because I can only say that in hindsight, because every client except for one has hired us back within a year. So these guys fired us, and we realized, oh no, we've got to. So we spent $20,000 on writing a big report, and it's on the website. You can read it. So it was delivered to them. Being very frugal Vermonters, they were determined to get value out of that report, and they read that report, and they read that report, and they read the report again, and they read it again. And I got a call 1 year later saying, Bill, we're really sorry. This is the best thing that's ever happened to us. We're now loaning money to other cooperatives, we're establishing farms, and what they've done, to the point now where we were getting a film done about our work, the president of the co-op said, let's keep going here. There's the old co-op, there's the new one, they did build it. He said, I want to stand in front of this co-op and say the building doesn't matter. What matters is that we are in relationship with the land and each other. So that is a regenerative product. Because those people who carried it forward, they've written a 100-year plan based on that report to incorporate that thinking into they're truly acting. So remember when I said you're going to leave the design project and people have to take it on its own? I mean, we totally lucked out. Who knew? But what I can say, now here's an interesting fact about the 1 year thing. It's an old Harvard study that says it takes 1 year for the synapses to shift in the brain. It takes 3 years for them to shift permanently. When you shift from thoughting to thinking, it's hard work. And you're going to have some very frustrated people. That's all the more reason why you have to be very sure about your own role and work in this work, because you have to manage your own state. And what's interesting, so we have one client who's a Kundalini yoga master, and she said, oh yeah, we say the same thing in Kundalini yoga. 300 days to begin the shift, and 1,000 days for the shift permanently. So this is hard work, but it is the work that's required of us. Okay, pieces versus wholes. What the heck is a whole? So we have to work with whole systems? Let's really get into this. Because a whole is not just a bunch of pieces glued together. You've heard that definition, a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Okay, it's a good definition. And here, I'll prove it. Jose, I'm going to take Jose's parts. His kidneys, his lungs, his circulatory system, his strange hat. And I'm going to put it in a pot and stir it around. Do I get Jose? Now, this is where I learned calculus. So, it's interesting. What makes Jose, Jose? Now, I can't answer that question, because that's we're into the realm of metaphysics now, and it's far be it for me to try to propose. But I will say that there's two schools of thought in it. One is the vitalist school, which says there's a spirit out there that's inhabiting your body, or consciousness, or consciousness, which basically is when you get systems working together in tight patterns, they become alive. I think both sound semi-BS-y to me. But pick one, it doesn't matter. We do know that there's something that enlivens, Jose, true? Okay, that makes you different from your pieces. Now, let's go outside, Jose, and for some reason, that's your name, right? Okay, good. All of a sudden I said, geez, I am doing. So let's go outside, Jose. Let's go to the land of the live on. Now, this is a cosmology, admittedly, but it's one that we take pretty seriously in our practice, is that every place is alive. Does that seem too alien to anybody? So just like there are universes in our gut, right, of microbes that are living off us, they have their own ecosystem inside our body. We, as humans, are an ecosystem in a larger system of life, of trees, of microbes, of mycelium, of water. And just like every person in this room is unique, every place on the planet is unique. We make the distinction that the largest manageable watershed is the smallest unit of design. Until we are working with water, soil, air, sun, and human consciousness, we are not working with life. By the way, the alchemists, or Aristotle actually, earth, wind, fire, and water, you all heard that, right? Universal elements make perfect sense. Without them, we don't have life. In the Eastern tradition, there's a fifth element called the Akashic field. The Akashic field means sky in Sanskrit, or ether, or it's translated to be consciousness, love, spirit, pick your metaphysics. But the point is that we also need to be conscious of these relationships, and that's what this regeneration requires of us. That's what living in a reciprocal relationship with life requires of us, to be in a conscious relationship with how life works. Is this all holding together for you, folks? Mm-hmm. I know this is getting a long lecture. I know you're getting kind of stirred. Okay. So a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Every place is different. The question then is, now, how do we design for place? Understand place. Work with holes, patterns, and essence. What does that mean? Okay. So, building, site, watershed. There's no boundaries. We are an ecology, as we did before. We're not the environment. The question that we ask people when we go to communities, or building, we do it for building projects too. We ask people in the community, how big is here? Because they know how big here is. Often it follows the boundaries of a watershed, and sometimes it spans over a few watersheds. And they're remarkably consistent about how big here is. Because you know that there's a boundary between even neighborhoods in Mexico City, right? It's invisible, it's not painted on the line. When I lived in Baltimore, Maryland, and Baltimore, Maryland is a city of neighborhoods, I was walking along, I love cities, walking along and checking out the brownstones, the reformed stone houses, and everybody's black and white, integrated population in Baltimore, and everything looks the same. But I crossed this road, and I said, whoa! Really? I mean, what happened? Something happened when I crossed this street, and I'm in a different place. And so the guy comes trucking down the sidewalk, and I said, where am I? He said, oh, you're in Patterson Park. I said, okay, where's there? He said, oh, that's high. So I had crossed an energetic boundary between, and I'm not making this up, it felt like I was going through the zone. So, and I'm not even that sensitive to this stuff. So something big is going on. The point is that we know how big here is. And by the way, let me give you a little hint. Never ask people what they want. Not right away, anyway. What you need to do is ask people how they live. Because that's a pattern. That's what we're going to go right now. So, every place is unique, dynamic, and alive. The only way we are going to really understand that is by not saying, people, I want a new school, or I need a new highway. It's how people live. Where's here? Where do you interact? How big is your community? Why do you love it? Why do you stay here? Why do you hate it? I mean, all those things. But don't ask them what they want, because by the way, none of us know what we want. We might think we know what we want, but that's a thought. That ain't thinking. It takes much deeper time to really understand what it's about. So we need to ask how big is here. It's both. And here's an interesting thing: when you're working with life, there's always paradox. You know you're on the right track when you have contradiction. We have a boundary, and we don't have a boundary. Let's take your skin. You think you're bounded by your skin? You're not. What happens if your skin was really solid metal? You'd be dead in the center. And what happens if it wasn't bounded at all? You'd be a puddle, equally dead. You have a boundary that is in constant flux and change. Your body's in constant flux. It's a different body every 7 years. You're not who you were 7 years ago. Certainly your thoughts aren't either. So what we have a tendency to do with thought in our culture is we think we're static. We are not static. We're always moving. We're always evolving. So a place is equally complicated. So how the heck do we work with that? So this is the definition of a system. Now we're going to get to some serious system stuff. Elements in relationship. Do we need a stretch? I sense that energy is going down. Is it? What am I saying? What am I doing? Okay, I mean, you all right, folks, or do we need a break? Okay, I just kind of do it. All right, well, bear with me. So, elements in relationship. There's a third aspect to a system. Do you know what that is? Every system has to have elements in relationship, but there's a qualifier. Can you have an idea?
This is the person we see in the person we see in the system.
Yeah.
Is the third element?
The person?
The person that is
It's kind of an interesting angle, but no, it's not what I'm looking for. I'm fishing for an answer.
The process between the communication between the
Kind of. That's an aspect of it. All right, I won't put you on hooks anymore. So, let me try this. If you were, what is it, a Yanomamo Indian from South America, what's that Stone Age tribe?
Yanomamo.
No, what is it?
Yanomamo.
Yeah. Something. Give them a water. Yanomamo. Huh? All right. And you saw these parts. And you said, that's a system. Put it together. Would they be able to do it? They would? Why?
It has some resemblance to nature because it has to be created.
You are a creative mind.
Everything is created in, it's all we know, isn't it?
Yeah, you know what this is, right? Yeah. If they've never seen a bicycle, would they have a clue? Yeah, they might look something. It might look like this. But my point is, and I take it. My point is that the system has to have a purpose. Is that if you don't have a purpose, you can't work on a system. Now you will find that I have found some violently opposed points of view on this. I'm not the only systems person out there talking about purpose, and yet I was in almost shouting match with a scientist from the University of California, Berkeley, who said no system has a purpose. It's a neutral thing. You can't ascribe any human dimension onto a system. And then the question that I ask is, well, how are you going to work on it? He said, it just is. So I don't have a clue what he means. But let me just point out that this is not universal. But I can tell you that Dana Meadows, who's a pretty great system scientist, this is what she claims, that a system has to have a purpose. I buy it. If we don't understand the purpose, how can you possibly work with it? Which means, but I think what the scientist that I had this argument with was coming from, he said, we make misjudgments about purpose. And that's true. And that's why we have to be in a reciprocal relationship, continually feeding with each other to understand what life is really trying to do there. So let me talk to you about the nature of purpose now, in terms of design. So this is a project we were working on 2006, 2007, which is why it's not built, because 2008 came along. But it's a good story, and it's a great photograph. So let me give you the story. every system has a purpose. If we don't understand its purpose, we have no right to impose our will on it, unless we understand it. The question is, well, how do you know what its purpose is? We're going to talk about that. But you can know, or you can have a pretty darn good idea. So, this land is 3,500 acres. What's that in acres? 1,600 acres. So, it was proposed, and he wanted to put 1,000 homes on this farmland. Now, are you familiar with LEED? LEED says if you build on farmland, you don't get what? Points. Meaning you don't get 1 point. Build on farmland, you don't get a point. What does that mean? What does that say to the environmental and architectural community? Huh?
It's not for good
For farming. That farming is good and building isn't good. That's what it's saying. Except when farming isn't good. And most farming isn't good. So that's an interesting, that's one of these gross abstractions where we say it's best for farming. Really? Maybe. Now, I would say that it's best for good farming, but it's not best for bad farming. This is bad farming. So, farmers came here 100 years ago, 120 years ago, they dammed up this stream, Mahogany Creek. This is the stuff you have to look for. We're looking for patterns. We are now tracking. We came here, we did about a week's worth of research, reading histories, scientific journals, interviewing environmental community members, and then we came and we walked around this valley for 4 days. Yes?
Where is it, just saying?
Oh, I'm sorry, this is in Driggs, Idaho. Okay, yeah, let me give you, this is Driggs and Victor, Idaho. We are flying over the Three Sisters, you know, the big crag in the Tetons. We're looking southwest, these are the big old mountains. Yellowstone Park is about 30 miles that way. So, okay, so farmers came there 20 years ago, they came up Mahogany Creek, and they planted a bunch of acreage. They used that water, they used 90% of the water to irrigate these fields. However, what we have to understand is the nature of how this land processes itself. And you know, just like there's a hydrological cycle, which is grossly oversimplified to saying the water evaporates from the ocean and drops its rain, it's much more complex than that. If that was the only cycle we depended on in the world, we would all be standing on a rock right now. I mean, I'm serious. If the water cycle was all that was operative, we'd probably be swimming actually, because water erodes stuff. What allows, besides uplift, what allows the land to be maintained? And that's, yeah, not really. We lose a lot of soil with agriculture. What allows the land to be maintained is the nutrient cycle. The nutrient cycle basically is, and the salmon are the best example of this, when the salmon swim upstream and die, they are actually depositing hundreds of thousands of tons of biomass in an ecosystem. In fact, when the salmon get removed from the ecosystem, the forest starts to die within 18 months, by the way. We've done experiments. So, when the farmers came here, can you see these faint lines on the stream back there? Yeah. What do you think those were? Water. That was water. So it's a dendritic pattern, and it formed this alluvial fan. What farmers did when they came there, they planted these orthogonal fields with fences, they destroyed the connectivity of the water to the Teton River. And in doing so, they are destroying 3 ecosystems. The Teton River is almost a dead river. This used to be a salmon river. The prairie savanna here is now a monoculture of barley for growing beer. And the big old mountains no longer have nutrients going up because there were otter, beaver, moose, elk, deer, bobcats, insects, birds, fish going up these streams all the time. Without them there any longer, that nutrient cycle's gone, and the big old mountains are in steep decline. 3 ecosystems destroyed, and we get a lead point for doing so. Now, by the way, I'm pretty proud of what LEED has done, and I'm one of its inventors, but it was never meant to be the indicator of successful redesign. It was meant to transform the marketplace. It's done that, it's time to move on. And this is where we're moving. So, okay, we've destroyed 3 ecosystems. What are we going to do about it? So, human development comes along, Can development be healing? Is development developing? That's the question. Every environmentalist in the community said absolutely not. The ecologists in the community said, well, maybe. And so the question is, how can we bring back the health of this ecosystem? Because $135 billion to pay off these farmers who are all going broke, by the way, because they can't make a living from cash crop agriculture. It used to be subsistence farming. Nobody was willing to pay that money. So what the town was going to propose was one house per 40 acres. Zoning, which what would it do? It would keep the same pattern, the same segmented pattern. So that's no answer at all. That's an automatic, thoughting answer. Let's build less houses. The developer comes here and says 1,000 homes are all I can afford to build, but when we actually proposed to the developer, the purpose of this land was to function as a living bridge between the Teton River and the Big Hole Mountains. You get that? Do you resonate to it? By the way, that's the test. Does it feel right? By the way, we stop there. Feel right. So I get challenged by this a lot, so I'm just going to cut it off. How do you test anything in life? I mean anything. A spreadsheet, a construction, a building cost estimate. How do you find, what's the final check that you do?
So let's perceive it, so you have to sense it.
I ask, because I'm at risk when I do architectural fees and proposals for projects. I say, how does that feel? Does that sound right to you? And when it doesn't feel good, I usually find an error. And I know guys, so guy at Turner Construction, I asked him, I was talking to him, he had a cost estimator at Turner Construction. I said, how do you test your estimates for a $100 million project construction? And he didn't even hesitate. He said, I tested by how I feel about it. Whoa. So, yeah, well, but it's true. You know that this is true. The older you get, the more you trust your gut, right? It takes a long time to learn to trust your gut. That's really accurate. What's that about? Ooh. But you know it's true. And I'll tell you, when you're working with a community, that's what you test. How does it feel? So, we had, anyway, you get the idea. So, the developer and the design team said, when we said this land is meant to serve as a living bridge between the Teton River and the Big Hole Mountains, they said, oh my goodness, that's what's going on there. And within a half an hour, those 1,000 homes were on the verge of being compressed to very narrow slots of townhouses and apartment buildings. So that there were 500 meters between them, which is the maximum you need for any wildlife species to feel comfortable. And even if there were 1,000 homes built there in these wedges, oh, by the way, here's the soils map to prove my point from the street. So, I mean, this is all available. This stuff's all available. Just people aren't patterning it. It doesn't take much time. But anyway, so if they had those 500 meters, 1,000 homes, they would only use 10% of the water from the stream. The water would repopulate, if you will, these stream beds. You have connectivity back. And by the way, even if the animals felt comfortable, you could have done dryland farming in those areas. Polycanopy farming been much more productive. Win, 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 win. Total reconciliation. Okay, you see how this works? When you get, just like the building example, when you get to the core of something, you can make big lateral moves. When we argue about existence, I want this, I want that. You've all been there, right? And people say, well, I'm going to be damned if I don't get what I want. And then you get, well, okay, maybe you will, so you get maybe 10%, 20% less, and everybody's happy. It's not the way to do it. That's not the way to live life. You get to the core of the issue, and then we can make big sideways moves. Is this making sense? Okay. Patterns are powerful. The pattern, and by the way, data is not pattern. Just having a bunch of data does not mean you understand anything. You have to put the data into how it works. What are the dominant patterns? I'm going to give you some examples about this in a bit. What's the pattern in this graphic? Some of you have seen this, so don't answer if you haven't. That is a pattern.
ABC.
Yeah, that's a pattern. What's the dominant pattern? I mean, it's going to be dozens of patterns. I'm looking for the dominant pattern. Then we're going to test what he knows, right? You've seen this sometimes. No?
1, 3, 2, 1, 2.
Okay, there's a pattern there.
The
But
top ones are all straight lines, and the bottom ones have curves.
Okay. So what she's proposing is the top line has straight line elements, the bottom line has curved line elements. Christopher?
What about the way that you sing it when you do in the J? It's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J,
It doesn't work
K.
when you.
So you think it's following the note pattern?
I did that.
You know, you win a star for creativity. So, what do you think the dominant pattern here is, though? The highest level of complexity that everybody feels is correct. I'm proposing that straight lines and curved lines is the dominant pattern.
For design.
Because that's the simplest way to make sense out of this diagram, which is always a test of pattern. What's the simplest way? Everybody see that?
Yeah.
Does everybody agree that it's the dominant pattern? Okay, now here's an interesting thing. It's pretty remarkable that there's that much agreement around an issue. Patterns are powerfully aggregating. If we argued about lead points, though, we would be here for months talking about which fragment do we want to include, because the fragments are not part of the whole. A pattern is more a whole. Make sense? Patterns are the most powerful way to communicate. Okay, now, what's going on, though, is that in our pattern recognition, we need to understand there's a different nature of systems that we have to understand patterns in. And this is where it gets, some thinking is required here. Okay, now, the systems that we are most familiar with are closed systems. They're cybernetic systems. They're basically designed by computer geeks and relationships at bomb sites, actually, with the vet group. John Forrester at MIT is actually figuring out how to bomb things more effectively. The military so they figure everything out for us. So the closed system is basically, though, you can track and have arrows of all the flows. So an automobile engine, you can say, well, you put gasoline in here, fires the piston, turns the crankshaft, turns the flywheel, turns the transmission, turns the wheels, and the tires, and we move. You can put arrows, cause and effect, right? We try to do everything that way. Unfortunately, what we try to do is we try to do that with life. So an open system, and by the way, a closed system has an energy input. Gasoline, a battery in your watch, wind the watch stem. That's a closed system with an energy input. An open system has both energy and material input. When you have energy and material input, you have evolution. Because transformation is happening for that food. When you're transforming that food into something else, you actually have the capability for evolution. Energy alone doesn't seem to do that, but these are broad brushes.
But shouldn't it like evolve by itself, like without any need for material and energy?
Well, you have to ask God. No, you will.
Well, like
He or she
humans,
knows. Huh?
So like humans, they evolve like,
Well,
like any species.
Well, but we certainly have lots of input, right? I mean, we've evolved over time, or, you know, whether we evolved from monkeys, or we were deposited here, Adam and Eve.
No, but I'm talking like since you're a fetus and now you're like bigger.
Yeah, you know, I would say that's not the same thing as evolution. That's viability. So, I did have a slide on that. There's vitality, viability, evolutionary capability, and regenerating the field for evolution. You need all those four levels working for life. So you're vital. I take a snapshot of you again. Your heart's going and pumping, right? That means you're full. You are full of life. That's what vital means. Now, what happens if I don't give you nutrition? You die. So you're no longer viable. So viability requires an additive. Now, what happens though if you don't evolve? Let's say that you're a Neanderthal, no offense, but let's say you're a Neanderthal species, and you don't evolve with Homo sapiens. you die. So evolutionary capabilities required too. Let me give this example in a more mundane. I was walking by the dental school at McGill University a few months ago, and they have an exhibition of dentistry from the 1890s. You don't want to know. Yes. Anyway, so and the point that they were making is that if McGill hadn't kept up with other dental schools, they would have been out of business as a dental school, right? So they had to keep up with the evolutionary capability of their competitors. That's required for life to be sustained over time. Now, for that evolution to be sustained over time by those of us participating in it, we have to continually regenerate the field of evolution. Now, this is where it gets a little dicey. But if we just said, and it's kind of what we're doing right now as a species on the planet, life just goes on, who the heck cares? Let's take all the oil we want and screw life, as long as I can have a party. That's missing regenerating the field. What we are doing tonight is the process of regenerating the field of evolution. Because we have to go out there in order to regenerate the interest of people to look at their engagement in life. Is that making sense? Okay. So as a species, we are not regenerating the field. Hence why we need regenerative design to create sustainable conditions. So an open system, this is an example of mechanical systems thinking applied to a living system. This is the United States Army's version diagram of the Afghan campaign about 3 years ago. Can you understand what's going on in this picture? No one can understand the picture. And yet somehow we think that we've made sense of it by drawing arrows. Whoop, the arrows. Yeah, it connects there, it connects here. We do learn something, and you may actually ask some interesting questions. You have no idea about how this entity is working. It does give you useful questions to ask, but that's not it. It is bullshit. So, yet that's the level of thinking that we do in terms of applying mechanical systems thinking to life. You can't, I'm just going to make this blanket statement, you can't do it. It's too complex. Elizabeth Sakaris, the evolutionary biologist, says having all this level of data and thinking we understand life is a fool's errand. She likens having cracked the genetic code as if trying to understand a human being by the genetic code is like trying to understand New York City by reading the white pages. You know, it's information, but it isn't the pattern. So what's necessary then for the living system is to understand the core pattern of what makes life work. Remember the example of the Tetons I showed you that said that core pattern was that land served as a living bridge? That was a core pattern. That if we disrupted that, we would destroy life. That's the level of essence that we have to look for. So, closed systems are easily quantifiable. Open systems are difficult to quantify. Living systems are really difficult, and that's why we need qualitative patterns. And this is where stories come in. Every great civilization that has lasted more than a few hundred years has been a storytelling civilization. Stories hold complexity. It's why we read stories. And it's why we mine great classics all the time. Native peoples told stories. Tecumseh in the United States, actually, I'd love to find this quote, but it was read to me by Jerry Wilhelm of Conservation Design Forum. When Tecumseh, when he first saw a white man writing words, he said, oh no, they destroyed the story. Because the story evolves. The story has to continually change as life changes. That's the regenerative field. He said, when a white man puts words on the paper, they die. They lock it into a static relationship. So stories, whether they're written down or not, need to be continually evolved. And that's why the oral tradition is so powerful. I'm not suggesting that we need to get into an oral tradition, but we actually have to be storytellers again and tell you the way life works in our places, because it's unique in every place. So, as with children, developing potential, not just technology. Living systems evolving, self-organizing with emerging potential. We hear this all the time in living systems theories. Life is about emergence. Okay, I get it. Life evolves. Yeah, okay. Well, what do we do about it? I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting concept. I mean, That's basically what we hear out there. How do you practice it is what I'm trying to convey to you tonight, is that there's a way to embody it, and we actually can learn from the Asians. It's been done before. We just have forgotten in the last 500 to 2,000 years. By the way, this is Abu Dhabi in 1963. Here's Abu Dhabi now. It's got incredibly healthy mangrove forests. That's because of desalinating water. 27% of the water used in Abu Dhabi is to water the presidential lawns. That's a official statistic. But nonetheless, there's an incredible mangrove forest created that actually are compensating for some pretty bad stuff going on. Life responds to its forces arrayed with it. Why do we have big trees in wet climates? Trees are the expression of amount of rainfall. Because you have that much amount of rainfall, you have something to absorb it. Trees in a forest are standing columns of water. You know that? They're holding millions of gallons, liters of water. And they're transpirating it. So, and the root system are holding millions of gallons. Without those trees, the place would be washed away. So you have to look for the way life is expressing itself in each place. And we also have to look at the way it expressed itself in the past. One of the things that I get from landscape architects especially is, so we were working on an island in the Caribbean, in Grenada. It doesn't matter. An island in the Caribbean. And it's a desert island. Well, it used to have 300-foot trees, 200-foot trees, all over the island. As a landscape architect said, but I love the desert ecosystem. Well, who the heck cares what you love? I mean, we have life to worry about here, but I love the aesthetic of the desert ecosystem. Well, we don't have any life here. Oh, it's so beautiful. So, all right, what we have in this planet are wicked problems. You ever hear that expression? It comes from Boston. One of the famous, the expletive in Boston is wicked. And it's wicked. Basically, it's Harvard Business School term now. Wicked problems are problems with unintended consequences. We are living with problems that are so complex we can't possibly address them by saying, I want this, I want that. I think I want that. Because these are sets of, tell me if these are characteristic of what we have going on. Sets of complex interacting issues, right? Stakeholders are a key element. Like people, birds, animals, water, are stakeholders. The challenges continuously emerge. There's always a new challenge. And it's always evolving in a dynamic social context because the social systems are always evolving. That's the nature of the problems that are facing us on this planet. You cannot possibly solve them by saying, let's do this and let's do that. You actually are required to use pattern thinking if we're going to do this. So wholes are understood in essence patterns. Now the process of extracting the underlying essence of an animal, plant, or community organism and generalizing it so that it has wider applications. Let me share with you a story about essence, not from the designer. So how many of you read the biography of Steve Jobs? And so I'll share the story with you. So when Steve Jobs worked from essence, one of his qualities of genius. And so when he sold his first iteration of Apple, he had $100 million in the bank, nice chunk of change, and he was a geek and he loved anything with computers, and he invested $60 million in Pixar, the animated movie studio. Pixar was developing the first feature-length computer animation cartoon. Toy Story, you're all familiar with that? Yeah. Okay, so then you'll be able to relate to the story. So, $60 million was all half of what they needed. So Jobs had to go to Jeffrey Katzenberg at Disney to get another $60 million. And they became 50-50 partners in supporting Pixar. Jeffrey Lasseter, who was the founder and creative director of Pixar, was writing Toy Story. Jeffrey Lasseter, Katzenberg, of Disney, looked at the script, read the script, and he said, oh, this is terrible. Because he was applying the lead checklist. And one principle that he was looking for out of his cartoons that he was investing in is that it had to appeal to a broad range of demographics. He said, this story is too sweet. I think Woody was the Tom Hanks character. Is that right? Woody? Yeah. So Woody was just too nice. He said, you've got to make him angry. So Jeff Lasseter went back and wrote more anger in the script. And it was not so good. He wrote more anger and it got worse. 6 times he wrote the script over, and finally it was done. It was totally screwed up. So Jobs said, all right, Katzenberg, get out of here. You don't know what you're doing. So, which would be typical of Steve Jobs. And so Jobs went back to the Pixar studio and said, we're working from essence. What's the essence of a toy? That's what we're writing about. What's the essence of a toy? I don't know how long it took him to come up with this. It was not easy. But the essence of the toy was a toy wants to be loved. Makes sense, right? Have any of you had that experience? I still remember a teddy bear that I lost. I do. That I pushed out of the window. I still wonder where that poor teddy bear is. So, when I was 6. So, the toy wants to be loved.